Joining us now is Maayan Hoffman, ILTV's executive editor and strategist. Maayan, thank you so much for joining us and making the time while you're in Australia.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he expects the second phase of the ceasefire plan for Gaza to begin soon. Of course, the ceasefire remains very delicate, and the second phase appears as though it's going to be more difficult than even the first, and the greatest uncertainty is whether Hamas is willing to lay down its arms. What's your assessment, and how challenging is this second phase?
So I think you're actually going to be looking at a very difficult time to be able to get to the second phase. And one of the main reasons is that the core of that second phase is the international security force, right, that would come in and would help to keep Hamas at bay while Hamas finishes disarming. But as we saw over the weekend, Khalid Mashal made very clear, one of the leaders of Hamas, in his speech in Turkey, that Hamas is not willing to lay down its arms, nor is it willing to lose control of the Gaza Strip. Now, there is one deceased hostage still left to come back. We believe that we understand where he is, and Hamas is just holding on for dear life. If you remember, that was supposed to happen in 72 hours, and here we are several weeks later. When that hostage is returned and we prepare to move to stage 2, the question is who will serve on this international security force and how we continue to disarm Hamas. And the understanding from most of the people, most of the countries, I should say, who have offered to potentially send in a security force is that they don't want to fight Hamas. They don't want to disarm the terrorist organization. They'll help the Gazan people, maybe work with the humanitarian aid that needs to come in. But certainly Hamas will continue to regroup and rearm and, in fact, get stronger if Israel isn't able to take action. My assumption, to tell you the truth, is that will last a month or two of us continuing with our hands tied, unable to take action. But eventually the United States will need to ask Israel to get the job done. Military analysts and security officials are saying 1 to 2 months tops. Remember, our hostages, our live hostages, are now out, which means in terms of our ability to take down Hamas, it's even greater. We couldn't go into certain strongholds before because of the hostages. So now, hopefully, Israel will be able to finish the job. And my assumption is that's what's going to end up happening.
So Israel will be able to take out Hamas?
Well, I think you have to remember that we're not taking out Hamas. The idea that will not happen. You know, there was never this idea that we'd wake up and Hamas would be gone. And it doesn't mean killing all the people either, because the idea is not to get rid of all the Hamas terrorists specifically. It's that they shouldn't have military political rule in the Gaza Strip. The only way to move forward to stage 2 is to have Hamas not be in power so somebody else can be in power.
And so when that somebody else is in power, what does the future of Gaza actually look like?
Well, I mean, we know what the stage 2 looks like. We know what the vision, right, the 20-point plan involves eventually being able to even move to Palestinian autonomy and statehood. But getting from stage 2 to stage 20 is a very, very long and difficult trajectory. So if we just talk about stage 2, what you're talking about is having an international force come in and help to monitor the area, hopefully keep terror at bay, as well as to move forward with a peace board, right, which is an international peace board, followed by a technocratic government that would then allow new opportunities, new leadership in Gaza to begin to be trained and to form. Now, it sounds a little bit like an illusion, if I have to be honest, because we've not seen a Hamas get on board with this, which means that the terrorist entity is not only still there, is still being funded by Iran, is still interested in destroying the state of Israel, is not so interested in working with these international security forces that are supposed to come in. So, as I think Netanyahu put very, bluntly, stage 2 is not only, it's a challenge. This isn't something that's just going to roll in and be easy to accomplish.
Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has asked for a pardon from President Isaac Herzog relating to corruption charges against him, and Netanyahu has been on trial since 2020 after being indicted on charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust, and he, of course, denies all charges against him. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also said that he will not be retiring from politics in exchange for a pardon in his corruption trial, and he's not interested in a plea bargain. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think he'll get a pardon? Should he get a pardon? And how do the people of Israel feel about this?
So those are all three a little bit different questions, right? Yeah. So Netanyahu has asked for this pardon, but exactly as you said, he does not want to admit any guilt. Usually pardons come with saying, look, I'm guilty, but you're going to pardon me. Also, it would come with a step down from politics. The majority of the Israeli people, by all polls, would prefer for Netanyahu to step down. But Netanyahu has made clear, and in fact just overnight, that if we go into another election, that he will want to run. Now, elections in Israel are scheduled officially October of 2026, so about a year from now. However, there's been a lot of understanding that it is likely that we will go to early elections, which can happen. We've done it many times. If you remember, there were 5 elections in 3 years in Israel. Only one of them, of which Netanyahu did not come out as the prime minister. There was about an 18-month window there over the last 18 years or 20 years. And so it is likely that Netanyahu will run again. But it is definitely also likely that even if he does run again and even potentially gets in as the leader of Likud, though again, by all polls, the Israeli people are against that happening. Remember, there's been no commission since October 7th. We haven't been able to establish who, in fact, is officially guilty for what happened on the October 7th with the massacre. And likely it is not just Netanyahu, it is the heads of the IDF, the Shin Bet, it is in all spheres. But Netanyahu is a part of that. He was prime minister, and the people are angry to not have him take some accountability at this stage. You see, even after the hostages come home, protests in the streets against the government. So there will need to be a change, but let's just play it out and say Netanyahu gets in. What you'll definitely see not happen is the more extreme entities, the Bezalel Smotriches or the Itamar Ben-Gvirs, whose names appear in the media a lot because of the choice things they like to say. And that's more of an extreme right entity that we never had in our government before. The government budget did just pass, so right now it looks like they will at least go till the end unless early elections. But at that stage, you're likely to see more of a center-right government. You've seen much more unity between the Yesh Atid, the center-left parties, and the center-right. And it is more likely that whoever is prime minister, Israel is sick of the extremism, and we really want to heal. And one of the ways to do that will be to have more unity.
Now, since October 7th, there's been so much bias against Israel playing out in the media and the media's coverage of the war. We're also now hearing that anti-Israel messaging from podcasters as well, which is quite alarming. The BBC has ordered staff to complete mandatory anti-Semitism training following a series of scandals at the broadcaster. What's your assessment of why we've been seeing this anti-Israel coverage and anti-Israel bias playing out since October 7th?
Look, I think that the seeds of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism have been planted long before October 7th. And October 7th opened the floodgates to allow it to become mainstream and acceptable. Part of it is that anti-Semitism is always there, and anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are now one and the same in many ways. That's one side of it. On the other hand, one can say, and I've spoken to the Australian ambassador to Israel, who told me that he believes that part of the problem is Israeli policy. But I have a very hard time believing that the policy of, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu impacts swastikas or vandalism or fire bombings in the streets. And so, I think that we're in a very difficult time. We talk in Israel about the 7 physical fronts of the war and the 8th front, which is the PR war or the battle in the international sphere. And my take is that that battle is going to continue long after any wars physically end, because now that the floodgates are open, and you have to remember, in the United States and all over the world, here you kicked out the Iranian ambassador, right, because we saw that there were funding that was paying for hate crimes to take place on your soil. In America, too, all over the world, you've got Iran, you've got Qatar, you've got Al Jazeera feeding the flames, right, of this anti-Israel sentiment. And too often, and you know it as well as I do as journalists, it moves so fast today, and there is so little recognition for the need to check facts before they're reported, partially for clicks and partially because people are being driven, unfortunately for our field, by their emotions rather than reality. And when you mention podcasters, I think that's where social media podcasters, this is where you see it play out more and more, as opposed to even in mainstream media, where at least there is still a little bit of checks and balances left.
Yes, we need a few more of them, I think, as we've seen in the last 2 years. But you touched on, of course, anti-Semitism, and you're now here in Australia where we've seen anti-Semitism soar, sadly. It's really shameful. What do you make of what's been happening here in Australia? What are Israelis, what people over in Israel, what do they think of what's happening here in Australia when we've seen the number of assaults, abuse, vandalism, hate messages? They're up almost 5 times the level that they were before October 7. We've, of course, seen the torching of the Israel synagogue in Melbourne. Absolutely horrific. Can I get your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, look, it was actually very interesting. Right before I came to Australia a few weeks ago, there was a solidarity event held at Tel Aviv University. It was an Australian-Israel solidarity event. In the past, when we had solidarity events like this take place, the majority of the people were Australian or Australian-born immigrants who came out to support Israel. This was the first time about a third of the people in attendance were Israeli-born individuals, Israelis. And I asked some of them, why are you here, right? And they said, well, we feel we need to stand with the people of Australia. One of the striking things that has happened since October 7th is that the linkage between what happens in Israel and the diaspora Jews has become stronger than ever. And there is now much more of an understanding that we need to be working together, that just as the diaspora Jews are supporting Israel, Israel needs to support the diaspora Jews. The Minister of Aliyah and Integration held a very interesting workshop a week or two ago while I was here, where they brought together the leaders of a number of supporting organizations to talk about what would happen if all of a sudden there was a need for a mass migration to Israel, a rapid one, based on some kind of, very, God forbid, dangerous event or feeling that Jews were no longer safe. And I'll tell you, as I've been walking the streets of Australia, I haven't felt anything, but I have been interviewing the Jews in Melbourne and in Sydney for articles that I'm working on. And the sentiment that I'm getting is they're proud and they want to stay, but on the other hand, they feel that something shifted. They feel a little bit more unsafe. They're maybe not wearing, the Magen David, the Jewish star. They're not wearing their yarmulke or their kippah, and they're feeling afraid on a bus. And that's a really bad place to be. It's also an indication of where a country is going, because, that saying of it starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews, generally plays out as true.
Yeah. Maayan Hoffman, ILTV's executive editor and strategist, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.